We are joined by Seahawks writer for Seattle Sports, Brandon Gustafson. Brandon, thank you for joining us. And we really just wanted to see what is going on up north in Seattle. Were you surprised? We saw that you were in the press conference. Just take us through the last 24 hours.
Yeah, been a little strange, that's for sure. I thought going into this week it was a possibility. They always kind of talk after the year about contingency plans, and obviously Pete's not getting any younger, even if he acts like a little kid on the sidelines half the time. But you know what ultimately I think happened for me was I thought that once Tuesday passed that it was just going to be kind of status quo. Maybe they fire a coordinator or two, do some coaching staff changes on the assistant side. But I thought once we got past Tuesday that Pete was going to be back on the sidelines this next season, and obviously that's not the case, and we had just a really kind of surreal day yesterday up here.
Yeah, I mean, it really seems like it came out of nowhere from the outside looking in. And how much of this really was about Pete's performance these past couple of years, and how much of it more so is about the future of the Seahawks?
Yeah, it's a good mix of both. I mean, Pete was asked, I think it was one of the last questions he was asked about, like, hey, if you guys would have made the playoffs, do you think this would have happened? And he kind of quipped like, well, wouldn't have been today. Right. which I thought was just, pure Pete in a lot of ways. And, definitely got a good chuckle out of everybody. But, they were 9-8 last year. They were 9-8 this year. They went 7-10 in Russ's last year. And, you look at the entire body of work and you see, Super Bowl title, Super Bowl appearance, 14 seasons, 10 playoff berths. Well, they missed the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. It's right. So half of those missed playoff seasons have come over these past 3 seasons. So I'm sure that was part of it. But Pete made it pretty clear too that a big part of it was the organization kind of just putting more power in John Schneider's hands. And Schneider's been the GM there the entire time Pete's been there in 2010. But I think a lot of people on the outside don't realize that Pete's also been the executive vice president of football ops. So Pete has final say over every single personnel matter, every single trade that they make, draft picks, signing, etc. Schneider obviously had a big hand in all of that, but the buck stops with Pete. And at least based on what Pete was kind of saying yesterday, it sounds like Schneider's going to have a lot more power, and that was a big part of why this was made as well.
Talking to Brandon Gustafson, Seahawks writer for Seattle Sports. Brandon, what do you think the appetite is for Pete Carroll at this point in time? I mean, we had 3 Hall of Fame coaches move on in the last 24 hours. Do you think he wants to keep coaching? Do you think there are teams out there that would be interested? I know we talked about his age. What do you think actually ends up happening next for Pete Carroll?
Yeah, I would guess that his time as a head coach is done. It's so hard to tell, especially because of the success of so many of these young guys, right? Obviously you guys down there, McVay and Shanahan, right? Like those are kind of still, even just a few years later, like that's the hot thing. Teams want the young offensive-minded guys. Ben Johnson from Detroit's kind of the big sexy name that's out there in this coaching cycle. And I don't want to say like the game has totally passed Pete by, but I'm sure that's going to be in the back of a lot of people's minds. Maybe Washington, just because organizationally that's been such a struggle to get just a real good, strong culture there. They have the new owner who could maybe want to go out there and make the big splash higher. Pete made it clear too yesterday, like he fought for his job. He wanted to keep coaching it. He was on our station on Monday and said that multiple times. He said it after the game on Sunday. So I'm sure Pete still has an appetite for coaching. I'm sure that he's probably going to take a few days to at least kind of reflect and think about what he wants to do. But personally, I would be very surprised if he's on the sideline next fall.
Interesting, Brandon. Yeah, you just kind of mentioned, Ben Johnson in there and how those young, flashy OCs are really the path in which it seems like the NFL is going in the head coaching route. Where do you think the Seahawks look? Is it more so that direction? Is it going to be a younger guy, or what direction really do you think the Seahawks are going to look for their next head coach?
Yeah, it's going to be. I'm really interested to see how fast they move on this and just what names get thrown out there. The first name that obviously came up was Dan Quinn, who with the Cowboys right now, D coordinator. Obviously, he was with the Seahawks back in the prime Legion of Boom days. He was their D coordinator for both those Super Bowl runs. So personally, I feel like they're going to run for a defensive guy. And I think part of it is two of the guys I mentioned. You're in the same division as McVay and Shanahan, and they've had just such a really tough time these last few years defending those offenses. Got swept by both of those teams this year. I think that another name that people probably aren't thinking about right now, but is a name that if the Seahawks do take their time with all of this, would be really interesting to keep an eye on, would be Mike McCarthy, because McCarthy was with Green Bay, and John Schneider came from Green Bay. He was a front office executive. From what I heard, they're actually pretty close. So if McCarthy's tired of Jerry Jones breathing over his shoulder, if Jerry Jones says, hey, Super Bowl or bust, otherwise you're canned, that's a guy that if the Seahawks don't move quickly would be someone to potentially keep an eye out for.
Talking to Brandon Gustafson, Seahawks writer for Seattle Sports. Brandon, before we get you out of here, things are going to change now with the Seahawks and Niners rivalry. Just give us your take on the rivalry, what sticks out to you, and what's going to change now with Pete Carroll stepping down. I mean, we know obviously it was Harbaugh and Pete Carroll, and now it's Shanahan. What are some highlights from the rivalry, and what do you think happens to it going forward?
Yeah, it's hard not to think about those years, 2011 through 2014, just the hard-hitting games between Pete's Seahawks and Harbaugh's 49ers. I think it's pretty obvious, at least to me. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a step back, and the 49ers have obviously taken that rivalry back. I mean, Shanahan, for those first few years, he couldn't beat Pete, even when he had some of those really, really good teams and whatnot. I mean, at best, Shanahan was kind of splitting with them, but that's obviously turned over these last 2-3 seasons. And, I don't think that the Seahawks are going to be a team that's probably next year going to be competing for an NFC West title. I think that based on just kind of who they have, their cap situation, the veterans, the older guys that they're probably going to have to move on from, I think that this year is going to be a lot like what people thought last year was going to be, where it's maybe 5, 6, 7 win team, really just kind of trying to find their young foundation and move forward from there. And obviously quarterback's going to be a big question. The easiest year for them to get out from Geno Smith. They have a 16th pick in this draft, so maybe this is the year that they get a new coach in there, find their new quarterback, and take that kind of step back before trying to take a step forward that they just never really did under Pete.
Brandon Gustafson, Seahawks writer for Seattle Sports. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck to the Seahawks moving forward. It was a heck of a time to a legendary Hall of Fame coach, not just with the Seahawks, but also with USC. Brandon, thank you so much for spending some time to talk Pete Carroll.
Yeah, you bet, guys. See ya.
All right, you got to get to a break. When we get back, continuing to talk about the coaches, also getting back into some Kings talk. Stiles and Watkins, Sactown Sports.